One of the familiar voices and folks that we had on the radio when he was a member of Congress is Bill Flores. He's back today. He is the chairman of ERCOT. Good morning, Bill.
Howdy, Scott. It's great being back here. It brings back a lot of old memories.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate the fact that you made time for us. The timing is really good.
I brought coffee, too.
You did, as a matter of fact. Thank you for doing that. The first cold snap of the year. I guess first we ought to just start. As chairman of ERCOT, basically, why don't you just tell us, what is ERCOT for those folks who don't know?
Sure. ERCOT is the grid manager for about 90% of the landmass of the state of Texas, about 75% of the landmass of the state of Texas, about 90% of the population. What it does is it makes sure that it's able to analyze supply and demand and keep those two things in balance for all of the citizens within its geographic scope.
So it keeps the lights on.
Keeps the lights on.
Yeah. And so you had experience in the energy industry before you ever really were in Congress. How has ERCOT been able to raise the reliability of delivery of power?
Sure. Well, let me tell you a little bit more about ERCOT. ERCOT is the third largest grid in the country measured based on demand, which is surprising to people. I mean, it only covers part of one state, but it's the third largest one. It's bigger than the New York ISO and New England ISO and California ISO put together all at one time. Now, the way it's been able to raise reliability is by following a set of statutes that were passed by the Texas legislature following Winter Storm Uri, which mandated better reliability, which mandated weatherization for power plants, which also passed reliability standards for requirements for the natural gas industry, which provides the power to a lot of Texas.
We were talking before we went on the air, where the power, whether there are surges or where there's a high need in power, for instance, the Metroplex is not going to have snow and that sort of thing. We're going to have it in the southern part of the state. But tell me, what are the factors that have to be considered as far as time of day, day of the week, and power usage in Texas?
Well, there are patterns, and ERCOT has those patterns pretty well mapped out based on historical standards, also overlay, and on top of that, they overlay the growth in Texas, which has been phenomenal. I mean, I tell people in a lot of speeches that I give that we're blessed in Texas because we're a high-growth state. We've got a very can-do state, but we're also challenged in the state because we are a high-growth state, and there's been an underinvestment in dispatchable generation. By dispatchable generation, I mean nuclear, natural gas, coal, and batteries. And so that makes it a little bit tough. Now, so ERCOT knows the demand profiles, and then what happens is it overlays on top of that weather patterns. And so during the week in the summer, you'll have peak demands in the about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, then you'll have another peak called a net peak around 8 o'clock at night when the solar's dropped off. And so ERCOT has to try to manage through those peaks. During the wintertime, the peak typically the rise starts about 5 o'clock in the afternoon when solar's falling off, and it is maintained through the night. The colder it gets, the higher the demand goes. And so ERCOT has to try to make sure it has generation available for all of those different times.
So how about holidays or weekends? How does that change the profile?
Holidays and weekends help. Usually demand is lower on holidays and weekends because you have lower commercial activity and you also have sometimes lower industrial activity. So weekends and holidays are typically a little lower. Like today, since it's a holiday, you don't have people going in offices, you don't have kids going to school, and so you'll have lower demand.
So Uri taught us a lot of things that were not being done right. Hopefully we've got them as corrected as we can. This is our first cold snap. We'll remind people that Uri happened in February, so we're not even to that point yet.
Right.
But how has consumption changed, and how has being able to meet that demand changed?
Well, peak demand in 2021, we don't know what the peak demand was during Uri because the system really broke down, and so there was no way to measure because there was no generation supply. We think, so everybody has a frame of reference for this particular weather event, we think peak demand will be about 79 gigawatts. The peak demand ever on the system was about 86 gigawatts in August of 2023, so about a year and a half ago. And that's compared to the peak in 2021 of about 79 or 80 gigawatts. So Texas continues to grow. Most of those peaks are hit in the summer times. This one is going to be hit in the winter time.
Bill Flores joins us. He's the chairman of the ERCOT board. We have a new administration being sworn in today. How will that impact energy in Texas?
Thank goodness we do. I mean, only, 4 more hours? Well, a lot of things. First of all, Chris Wright is a world-class Secretary of Energy choice by President Trump. I mean, I couldn't be more thrilled with that. Doug Burgum as Secretary of the Interior is going to be great as well. So those two have formed an energy council, and their goal is going to be make America energy dominant. Given that a lot of our generation is supplied by natural gas, they're going to be much friendlier to natural gas than we've seen in the past. And so that's going to be helpful. I'm also helpful that they'll be very helpful, that they'll promote nuclear, because nuclear is the ultimate green fuel that has zero emissions and it's dispatchable.
So you can, there's an app that people can go to if they want to see how much energy is being generated by each of these sources. So we understand natural gas, there's wind, there's solar. You mentioned nuclear. What else is out there as far as generating sources?
Battery, coal, and then some dogsy cats, other hydro. There's a little bit of hydro in Texas, believe it or not. But the ERCOT website has a fuel page right there on its homepage. That's my idea, by the way. So shortly after I joined the board about, I guess it was 38 months ago, I said, look, we need to be able to show, at least I want to see, what's our fuel mix. And so they put up a great fuel page. So if you want to see at any point in time what's powering the electrons that are keeping your lights on, it's on the ERCOT website. Also, the ERCOT website has a great supply and demand forecast. So if people want to go and you can see where the supply, where our reserves are, what the demand is, what the supply is. It gives you kind of an idea what the folks in the control room are looking at.
What's the URL?
What's that?
Yeah,
ERCOT.gov, ERCOT.com, excuse me, ERCOT.com.
So the chancellor has been kind of a local voice for the discussion of SMRs, or small modular reactors. Is that the future?
I hope so. I really think it is. But I'll tell you this. I mean, I think that large nuclear reactors are also part of the future as well. Somebody asked me the other day what I wish we had. I wish we had a South Texas 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then we had a Comanche Peak 2, 3, 4, or 3, 4, 5, and 6. So because nuclear is good, stable, dispatchable generation, and that's what we need. The governor launched an initiative in Texas to make Texas a leader in nuclear. That report is out and has been published, and it covers everything that a state can do. A knowledge base of people that can build these things, the manufacturing capacity that could be used for these permitting reforms that we need. The only things that report couldn't cover were fuel supply, which is overseen by the federal government, licensing, which is overseen by the federal government, and waste.
Now, one other generation also, the natural gas peaker power plants. Tell us about those.
Yeah. Natural gas peaker power plants are usually combined cycle plants. There are also sometimes that are reciprocal engines that are used. If you look here at BTU, what our local municipal utility has, they have some of each of those. They have an old steam unit that is not really a peaker. They usually spin it up in a time like this and run it at full capacity. Then they have up other peaker units that they can add, subtract as needed to meet demand.
So you mentioned BTU. That's a publicly owned company, but we know in the big cities there are other companies. So how does ERCOT treat those two different entities?
Well, ERCOT treats them all the same as generators. Now, the PUC, which is the regulator for the power industry, treats them differently. If you go to a large city like Houston in the Center Point area, there they have retail choice. So you have the ability to choose your provider. They have not expanded that to municipal utilities yet. And so here we're sort of captive to BTU. I will tell you, BTU is a whale of an efficient operator. If you look at the way it was able to operate through Uri, it was amazing, the differences between BTU's operations and let's say a Center Point or an Encore.
Sure. As you mentioned up front, this is only one of only 3 grids. We are not connected to the other grids. Should Texas grid end up being, in your view, connected to the other grids?
No, and let me give you a great example why. Following Uri, the PUC and ERCOT sat down and analyzed the things that occurred during Uri. And they came up with 88 recommendations. I may be off 1 or 2, but it was about 88 recommendations. And by November of that year, it had virtually I think it was all but 2 of those recommendations implemented. And that was about the same time that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, came out with their recommendations. We'd already done it. So it's, another example I'd use is here in Bryan College Station, each city runs its own power plant. Does it want to designate that to somebody in Houston to run them? So here in Texas, we don't want to designate our grid and have it under the auspices of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington. We like to run our own grid. We do have some limited interconnections. They're called DC ties. They use DC power instead of AC power that we use to push power back and forth between the east and west interconnects.
Okay. Once again, Texas independence, right?
That's exactly right.
Bill Flores, he's the chairman of the ERCOT board with us this morning. Thanks a lot.
That's great to be with you. And as I used to close our other conversations, I'd ask everybody to continue praying for our country, our military men and women, and our first responders.
Thank you, sir.